It's critically important for improving the outcomes for patients with cancer. Any new treatment that we come up with can't really be instituted and improve the lives of cancer patients until we've been able to demonstrate its activity in a small group of patients first, but then moving on to large groups of patients to compare a new treatment to the standard of care treatments to see if it really is better. Another good reason is that care for patients on a clinical trial is the best care available because of how carefully they're followed, how carefully they're looked after, and how carefully the data are collected about their outcomes. And particularly in this region, we have the opportunity, because of our large minority population, to do something that hasn't been done much before, and that's to make the outcomes or the results of clinical research trials applicable to the whole U.S. and world population, because up until now, clinical trials have mostly been carried out on white people, and that's not what the rest of the world or even the rest of our country looks like.
I am Community Chloe. Welcome to HERSTORY RVA, a virtual women's empowerment series curated with Black women in mind. This episode is presented by VCU Health. International Clinical Trials Day is held on May 20th each year to commemorate the day that James Lind began the first randomized clinical trial in 1747. This evening, we'll discuss the importance of diversity in discovering tomorrow's cancer treatments today through clinical trials. So joining me this evening to help facilitate this discussion are three amazing doctors from VCU Massey Cancer Center. So this evening, it's a night of no white coats and no copay. Dr. Randall has extensive experience with complex and novel chemotherapy regimens and clinical trials. Come on in, Dr. Randall.
How you doing?
I'm good. Also joining me next during this virtual stage is Vanessa Sheppard, Ph.D. Associate Director for Community Engagement Outreach and Health Disparities at VCU Massey Cancer Center. Come on in, Dr. Sheppard.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Doing well.
All right. And last but definitely not least, joining us this evening is Jose Trevino. He is a surgeon-in-chief medical doctor at VCU Massey Cancer Center. Dr. Trevino, come on in.
Hey, Chloe. Hey, Dr.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Everybody's good. Now, your extensive bios, you guys are great. They can just go to our website to get all of that information. But this evening, we want to jump right in. And I'm going to start with you, Dr. Trevino. What are clinical trials and how do they impact the development of new cancer drugs, and where are they conducted?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a great question, Chloe. So I'll tell you, clinical trials are, in my opinion, probably some of the avenues for which we discover really new therapies for these cancers. Back in the day, 20, 30, 40, maybe even 50 years ago, we used to treat all patients with the same drug. And what we realized that different cancers in different parts of your body actually were more kind of affected by certain drugs as opposed to others. And when we started to learn more about the biology of cancer, we started to learn about the differences in these cancers, we started to develop new therapies. And we just couldn't go around throwing therapies at everybody. We couldn't just throw therapies at patients with pancreatic cancer or ovarian cancer. We really had to hone in on what therapies were going to work best. And to do that was the development of these clinical trials. And these clinical trials are amazing for that reason, the fact that we bring in patients with a certain type of cancer. We try the drug on top of what we would consider the standard of therapy. People sometimes get confused that when you get this therapy, that you're being experimented on with this new drug and not getting the drug that actually works. But in reality, you get the drug that works plus. And so that's kind of the kind of in brief that what clinical trials do. Where do they get performed? Well, nowadays they get performed at academic centers like VCU, but they also get performed at community centers that affiliate with communities with centers like ours. And so it's really an open area where when patients should have discussions with their doctors about where they can be involved in this. And so I always tell patients all the time, empower yourselves to talk with your doctor and say, I want not only the standard, but I want to try something that might help me live a lot longer with a newer drug, not only to help myself, but to help all people with this disease. And so in brief, doesn't answer your question, Chloe.
Wow, that was good, Dr. Trevino, because when you're thinking about it, the clinical trial, the drug, it's almost like it's a better drug, right?
Well, it's a benefit. It's actually an added plus, is what I
Yeah.
tell people. And if it works, amazing, right? It works amazing. And you really are like, you not only you kind of help yourself, but you help others because you give us information on what to do next. If it doesn't, well, you know what? You still get the standard. You still get the care that you deserve. And that's sometimes a misconception because people think they're going to experiment on me. They're not experimenting on you. You're getting the best plus.
The best plus. Do clinical trials always involve new medicines? What other kinds of trials are there, Dr. Sheppard?
So clinical trials do not always involve medicine. They do not always involve a drug. A clinical trial could be for some patients where we want to observe what happens. And so that patient may fill out surveys and questionnaires. She may have additional tests, MRIs, things that are part of routine care. She may provide biospecimens in terms of blood and saliva and things of that nature. And sometimes the question is to observe what happens, to understand the pattern of disease. There are also times where there can be interventions. And so these are sometimes non-therapeutic interventions, basically interventions that don't involve taking medicine, right? And so we may want to see, well, if we develop an exercise trial for people undergoing cancer, can we mitigate some of the side effects that people may experience? So those are interventions. And a lot of times we think or hope that they would benefit the participant, but we actually need a study to compare, well, if we provide a decision support tool, helping women or men to make decisions about their cancer treatment. So those are types of clinical trials that we offer here at Massey. Sometimes they're called cancer care delivery types of studies where we're looking at how care is delivered. So people have the opportunity to participate in therapeutic trials that relate to their treatment, but also these trials that, won't be necessarily additional burden, maybe collecting some, like I said, some surveys or other things. And that really helps us to inform decisions about how we develop care. Because the goal is always to improve the patient experience.
Wow. Dr. Sheppard, this is great because, for folks who are watching, they are always assuming that a clinical trial involves some type of experiment on your body, but you're just talking about other testing and blood samples and, all of that stuff to bring it down. Me as having a doctor who sees my doctor often.
Yes.
Dr. Randall, got a question for you. What are some common myths that exist in regard to clinical trials?
Oh gosh, such a great question. I think that, we're hitting on a couple of really good ones here.
Yes.
I think experimental, guinea pig, those are really the words that I hear the most often. We can't do a clinical trial unless we run it through an ethics board. And these ethics board are no joke. Like they really take us to task and make sure that we're doing right by the patients. And it's called an IRB or an institutional review board. And those were created because of, past injustices that happened due to research. So, who wouldn't be afraid of research? Like when I was coming up in the world, like I was nervous about research. I thought, oh, it's like this experimental thing. And here we've got this regular treatment and shouldn't my patient just get that? But what really is what's this reality is that just like Dr. Trevino said, you get the actual treatment plus. Not only that, you get followed more closely when you're on a clinical trial. You get more scans, you get more blood tests. And, sometimes that's an inconvenience, but at the end of the day, like you're almost getting the best possible care.
Yeah.
And you only have one team, you have two teams. You've got your regular team, you got your research team. So you're just like surrounded by people that are looking out for you. And we actually have data that shows that patients who are treated on clinical trials do better in the long term than patients who don't go on clinical trials. And it's really interesting. And, I'm so, at VCU, we're really all about bridging the disparity gaps in care, especially to the African-American communities or the other communities of color. and clinical trials has been shown to be a key step in bridging those gaps. So that's kind of like what I live for night and day, is just trying to get more underrepresented minorities on our clinical trials, because that's how we make the quickest, fastest impact. And I like things that are quick and fast. I'm a surgeon like Dr. Trevino. I don't like to wait around, and I like quick answers. So this is one way of doing it.
Wow, this is good stuff. And I'm glad we're having this conversation when we're talking about clinical trials when it comes to African Americans. I have a friend, and she was diagnosed with stage 4 bladder cancer. And so they literally sent her home to keep her comfortable. But before she left, over at VCU Massey Cancer, they say, try this clinical trial. And here we are 12 years later. She's alive. She's well. Yes.
That's the power of the clinical trials.
It's important. And for us to deny something like that, we understand what happened in the past. We really do. But if you look at the African American, whenever we're talking about healing, it's rarely with us, because we're not a part of clinical trials where we can find out what is really going on in our bodies. And all of our bodies are different, regardless of your race and your background, but there are still some cures available if we do that. I hear Dr. Trevino is like, yeah, get it, Chloe. Tell him, Chloe. So now, speaking of diversity, why is diversity important among patient population enrolled in clinical trials, Dr. Trevino?
Yeah, I can sit here and talk about this for an hour. So, I mean, let's talk the reality of this. And so I think what people need to understand is we're all different. So I always tell my patients, God made us all special. And there's not one day that I don't have a conversation with my patient that God isn't a part of that conversation, because number one, he's there. Number two, he kind of surrounds us and allows us to kind of really see where we need to be. But he made us special in a way that we have to understand and appreciate our ancestry. There are particular parts of the world that have certain types of cancers higher than others. And when you come to this country, which is the big melting pot, what we've realized is that certain cancers afflict certain patients, certain races, certain ethnicities more than others. And people die of certain cancers where others might not die as quick or as advanced as certain patient populations. And so why is that? Why does that happen? That's an important topic, and people need to understand that we are not all, even though God created us the same, we're all not really the same when it comes to certain therapies. And so the importance of clinical trials delineates that. It absolutely, without question, delineates that. Well, how does it do that? And how do we figure that out? How do we know? So this country, and I'll just kind of go on a tangent for a second, this country by the year 2060 will be 50% minority and 50% white. In other words, we're getting more mixed in this country by the year 2060. We'll be half and half. And if I tell you that clinical trials in this country, only 10% of the patients that enroll in clinical trials are from Black, Latinx, or Asian, that's dismal. That's bad. When we know that Blacks, for instance, African Americans, have a higher chance of getting certain cancers and a higher chance of dying from them. And so I'll even make this even more kind of, in my opinion, important to talk about. So if I tell you that only 10% of minority patients enroll in clinical trials, that means that for the past 20, 30, 40 years, we've been testing a ton of drugs, and only really looking at 90% of the population, which happens to be white. And if I'm telling you that our biologies are different and certain patients are afflicted by certain cancers and probably have better therapeutic responses to certain drugs, what that tells you is we might have been throwing away a ton of drugs in the past 40, 50, 30 years that might have helped a bunch of patient populations if we only knew about it, if we could only have tested them in those trials. So the importance is there. I literally look at this and say, God, we have tested thousands of drugs and said that those drugs ain't working. But they might not work for 90% of whites, but it might work for Blacks, Latinx patients, African Americans, Asians, what have you. And if you believe what I tell you, that all our tumors are a little bit different, and this is why we study it, and there's certain targets that are higher in one patient population versus others.
Yeah.
The importance of that. So I mean, I can't stress this enough. This is the importance of diversity in clinical trials. So yeah, that's how I look at it. And I think it's an incredibly important topic to discuss.
And Dr. Trevino, when I'm thinking about it, we get the words of barriers and disparities when it comes to the African American communities. And then we're always saying, well, quality care is going to be accessible to our white population. And maybe that isn't so. When was the last time we have done clinical trials to help us in a wealthy and healthy place as well? So I'm glad we're having this discussion as well. And so now, really quick, Dr. Trevino, I want you to talk a little bit about some of the barriers and disparities that exist with clinical trial enrollment, particularly in the Black community.
Right. So Dr. Randall and Dr. Sheppard both touched on this. I think Dr. Randall, and I think you, Chloe, has also mentioned as well. We look at our past, right? Our past has been horrible to certain patient populations when it came to clinical trials. I mean, let's be very frank. We were doing bad things back, 50, 60, 100 years ago. So, but now, I talk to patients all the time, and I tell them, what is your hesitance with wanting to be in a clinical trial? And they tell me, we have no hesitance. We just want someone to talk to us. And so the ownership is on us as physicians. It's absolutely on us as MDs, as PhDs. We talk to these patients about, number one, talking with them, talking with the patients, sitting down and saying, man, this is a good thing for you. This is how it's going to work. And we're going to try this. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, you know what? We're still giving you the best. We're going to keep on moving forward. That's one barrier, is our ability to communicate with our patients. So it's on us to be able to learn how to talk to our community. The second thing, which I think is most important, and I think this is incredibly important, and our group has written a paper on this, and we're really proud of it, and it really took the community by storm, because we were blaming ourselves now. As physicians, there's these things called eligibility criteria. In other words, what we say is, you know what? You got to pass these markers to be able to be in my clinical trial. You got to be healthy. You got to have no cardiovascular disease. You can't have uncontrolled diabetes. You can't have hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and HIV, and all these things, or chronic renal insufficiency, or problems with your kidneys and stuff like that. And then I'm like, do you understand that in this country, the majority of people in the country that have really bad issues with diabetes happen to be Black patients and happen to be minority patients? And so we physicians are excluding our patients because of the fact that our criteria are so high. So we went ahead and we did this study. Not only did we say, we got to bring that criteria down, because HIV, we got that under control. Diabetes, we as physicians should be able to control that disease. Chronic renal insufficiency, we can fix that and we can make that better. All the hypertension, all the things that afflict mostly the minority populations of this country, or at least the lower socioeconomics, we can control. So we were excluding people from that. And I think that if we sit down with our patients and say, we're going to help you control your diabetes, we're going to deal with your HIV, we're going to deal with your Hep B and Hep C, because we can cure Hep C now. And we're going to get you in that trial because you deserve it. You deserve to be in there. When we start acting like that, that's when we start turning things around. And we start making things better for our patients when we understand our community and where we're at.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Trevino, for that. Dr. Randall, what efforts are being done at VCU Massey Cancer Center to increase diversity in clinical trial participation? I know Dr. Trevino touched on it, but I want you to put your spice on it.
Yeah, I'll put my spice. We work on this all the time. We do a good job. This is what attracted me to VCU. Dr. Sheppard and her group were already doing this amazing job. VCU's been recognized as a core site for underrepresented minorities by the National Cancer Institute. It's been top of mind probably forever. I don't know. It way predates me here. And it's really just to serve our catchment area. And these are our patients. These are our people. We can't take care of our people if we're not focused on improving minority enrollment in clinical trials. And we all believe in the depth of our heart, if we had to go get treatment today, that being on a clinical trial is the best possible medical care. And so we're about delivering the best possible medical care to everybody that's in our catchment area. And the minority Black population is a huge part of our population. So there are people, and we're here to take care of them. And as white as I am, I'm here to take care of them, because in my cancers, many of my cancers have a higher incidence in Black women. So to us, these things are emergency. Like, they're literally, we call them healthcare emergencies, and we're very focused on that.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Randall. And I know over in gynecology, is there a certain clinical trial for that, or is just one cancer treatment clinical trial? How's it
Got a
work?
whole huge menu of clinical trials
Really?
because we got lots of different types of cancer. Mine are the below the belt cancers. So they're uterine, cervix, ovarian, vulva cancer. For most of them, we don't have great treatments for them. If you can't get cured with surgery, you're kind of in a hard spot with these cancers. And so we have really revolutionized already with clinical trials how we treat these, but there's so much more work we have left yet to do because, and especially for the African American community, though they're the patients with some of the higher risk tumors, they've been left out of our clinical trials.
Going, seeing a doctor is very important too.
Oh, absolutely.
Early detection is key.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Dr. Sheppard, come on over here with the voice.
Can I come? Can I come? Yes.
Are you currently conducting any clinical trials now at VCU Massey Cancer Center?
So absolutely. And so we have plenty of trials. So we focus in breast cancer, I focus in breast cancer, and we have trials across the continuum, therapeutic trials to cancer care delivery trials. One of the things that Dr. Randall alluded to was this designation that we have. So we're an NCORE site. And so that's a National Cancer Clinical Oncology Research Program. And so we're one of 14 minority underserved sites in the country. So as a result, so we have trials that our faculty, clinicians do here, but we also bring trials around the country. And so what this enables us to do with our clinical partners and affiliates across the state is to give clinical trials that maybe will only be available in North Carolina or New York. We can offer them here. And so that's the benefit of, our organization here at Massey. It's the trials of the geniuses that we have here, and it's also the trials that are around the country that we offer here at Massey proper, but also in the community. Because the idea long-term is that people can get the care and the treatment close to where they live, right? And so we have many trials available. We have a website at a Massey Cancer Center where you can look at trials. We have outreach ongoing where people can talk to folks from the community about the trial, even if before you're a patient here. So we're really working to bridge that gap so the community members know about it. And I just want to say something about that percent representation. So with breast cancer, for example, African-American women have a 40% higher mortality rate. Many, many reasons that relate to that.
What are some of the reasons? Is it access to care?
So access is part of it. Treatment is a large part of it. Some of the discoveries that were made through the years really benefited white women more, the type of cancers that they tend to have, right? Because there are different types of cancers. As Dr. Trevino said, triple negative breast cancer tends to be an aggressive type of cancer. HR hormone receptor positive breast cancer tends to be not as aggressive, but we see disparities kind of regardless of the type of cancer, but we know treatment makes a difference. So when we think about some of the landmark breast cancer trials that happened that really changed how decisions were made about radiation therapy or what types of treatments to use, a lot of those trials had really low percentages of African-American women, some of them 2%, right? So you may have had 19,000 whites, and then just a handful. So then you don't really learn or understand what's going on. And so we care about that. And that's something being very intentional about because, we may be able to quickly, flip the script with some of these things by just the inclusion of more diverse populations. Like, hey, it didn't work here, but it worked over here. And we've seen some of those data with some of the other cancers. When we look at some of the data with multiple myeloma, for example, it looked as if, while this particular drug didn't seem to work, but when we sort of stratified, looked by race, they actually saw a signal in Blacks. Like, this is a good thing. So it's not, we talk about the inequities a lot and disparities, and it seems like, oh, it's gloom and doom, but people survive and, they are living after the diagnosis of cancer. Black people are living when they get the treatment. And so what we want to know is, how do we make sure that we can deliver in the right way? How do we make sure that we're having the conversations like Dr. Trevino has with his patients and Dr. Randall has, that they can ask questions, right?
Mhm.
And you can always say, no, not right now.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing dialogue. So we have many trials open, and people that they can talk to help them understand. And we also have sort of champions and people who've been through trials, so they can talk to
Yeah.
patients and survivors who've
My
been through
friend
trials.
she's always ready to talk about it.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it's almost like if there is a medication, and this what it looks like to me, okay,
Mhm.
as just a civilian. It looks like if you have this medicine in a clinical trial, right? And you administer this medicine to a patient, right? It works, might not work, it may work, but it's like it's in the mixing pot, right? And you say, hey, let me take that out, let me mix this up, let me put a little bit in that, and then we'll come back and do it again. Is it almost like that?
Yeah.
Dr.
Yeah.
Trevino?
I think that
I gotta, I'm always,
I, we're nodding that. I mean, I think that's a good analogy. You know, I
you're
think
like,
that.
look, we are all medical, and we are with the medical association.
you,
And
you,
these comments, the Soul Express comments, below.
but well, I think the good thing about it is not just Dr. Trevino in the back mixing it up, right?
Right.
I mean,
But the research is, you know,
but it's not just one person. I'm just picking on him
right.
because I see him, but it's not just me or
Yeah.
one other person. That it really is a team.
Mhm.
And when Dr. Randall said that the expectation in terms of the standards,
Yeah.
that this is something that your institutional review board reviews, but
Yeah.
then you also have all these other safeguards looking at toxicity. How are people doing on a trial? So by the time it gets to a certain place of clinical care, it's been through a lot of other testing and hoops, right? It's not the first time, that it's being sort of tested on a human, if you would. It's a lot of things that come. And then you have review boards that look at what's the risk versus the benefit. And if for some reason it doesn't seem to work, trials are stopped, things are switched, but this is probably the most attention a patient will get is when you're on a clinical trial,
Wow.
right? In terms of many, many people looking
Whereas you were
after
thinking
your
about,
well-being.
wow, I want an MRI, I want a CAT scan. Well, you're not going to be able to get it unless you deem something is wrong or you're having challenges. But if you're a part of that clinical trial, wow,
You may get a lot of extra
a
things,
lot
a
of
lot.
extra
Mhm.
care.
Yes.
All right. So I'm just learning, I'm asking questions
This
because,
is
folks are watching, and, I always thought it was something interesting when you talk about clinical trials. And Dr. Trevino, you said something really profound. You said, we found out that we want to offer a clinical trial to you, but we're not really communicating it to you effectively. Because you're the doctor, you want them well, but you're not considering the fact that I'm afraid. Am I going to be a guinea pig? And those are some of those issues. And Dr. Randall, I want you to respond to that. And then you, Dr. Trevino.
Yeah, I think that I try to listen, more than I talk when I know that trial's an option. I approach it really sensitively because if I've learned this the hard way. If you hit someone over the head with it and it's just like Dr. Trevino said, you're not going to sit and take the time to talk to them about it and really allay their fears and answer the questions. You're not going to get anywhere. They're just going to shut you down, and as they should, right? So I had to learn the hard way how to communicate, because that's the key to drawing them in and getting them interested. And so really what I've tried to do is I try to present it in the framework of, what the options are, because that's what patients want, right? They want options. Mm-hmm. And so my job is to create those options and choices for them.
Yeah.
And when I was training, we get examined, right? We get these board exams, we have to sit and get grilled on, and they want you to have the one right answer. But, patients aren't like that. They don't have that expectation. They don't want the one thing. They want options and choices. And a trial is usually a part of those options and choices. Mm-hmm. So you listen, you see where they're at, you find out what's important to them, you find out, okay, what are you most afraid of going into this? Mm-hmm. And then you can approach it in the context of what they need to know. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, I found that to be the most effective and efficient way to introduce trials to,
Mhm.
because the word trial is scary. I hate that word.
Me too.
Don't you? I
Yes.
just wish there was some other thing. Like, I don't like.
What clinical
butter.
is me? Clinical make me think of needles and bandages.
It makes you think of needles and bandages and straight jackets and white walls, and I just hate that. I hate that
White
about it, because it's just like
Yeah.
a big bunch of love wrapped up. We're just loving on people, trying to help
Right.
them live better and longer.
Right.
And that's all that it really is. It just sounds god awful scary, and I'd be afraid of it too, if I didn't do it every day. And it took me time to not be afraid of it, even as a physician. It took years for me to get comfortable with, this is the best thing to do for my patient.
Right. And so at first, when you start studying it and being a part of the clinical trials, thank you so much for your honesty, Dr. Randall, when you said, clinical trials, I don't know, let me do more research on it before I present it to my patients. And I think that's good. That's a great form of communication, because if somebody has a disease or been diagnosed with any disease and you're talking about a clinical trial, I just want to be well.
Right. I want to live.
Well,
Cancer.
and I need you to communicate that to me, that I'm going to be well. Jump on in, Dr. Trevino. What would you like to say about that?
Dr. Randall kind of hit the nail on the head. But I'll say this: when I walk into a room, when I talk to a patient about a clinical trial or anything I'm doing, I come in there and I hear what they have to say, their fears, their concerns, what they want out of every therapy. Then I give them my opinion on what I think I can do for them to address what they're thinking. Not only that, but also give them that therapeutic option. In other words, what am I going to do for you? How am I going to help you? At the end of the day, it's a partnership. It's a team. We got to be a team in that room. If we're not a team, we're not going very far. You got to trust me with your life. And you have to believe that what I'm going to offer you is the best thing for you. And we have to develop that relationship for people to really develop that trust. Some patients are harder than others, but you just have to understand. And as a physician, you have to have that patience. Understand their culture, understand their thinking. Why do they feel a certain way, as opposed to being somewhat, and some physicians get insulted. They're just like, I don't even want to deal with this. And some physicians walk into the rooms and they don't even want to offer the clinical trial because they feel that the patient will not be a part of it. They already make the assumption. They have this preconceived notion that it's like an unmeasured bias toward the patient. And so it's got to be a team. And what I say to my patients is this all the time. And it's funny because when my residents hear it, they know it's coming. I said, listen, we're in this room. You're the captain of this ship. And I'm just that guy that's looking out in front and saying to you, there's a big rock right there. You might want to turn to the left, but you're driving it. And the patient drives his care with me kind of helping him along the way. And the hope is that when I tell them, listen, this is better for you, this is a really great opportunity for you, explain it to them, let me hear their fears and concerns. And most of the time they turn to the left before they hit that rock. And we do it, and we do it together. And as Dr. Sheppard mentioned, Dr. Reynolds mentioned, we do this together and we maneuver through this together. And that's the key thing. We do it as a team. And that's what VCU Massey is all about.
Wow. Well, that's how we're going to pretty much sum it up. Take it on in. I heard you, Dr. Trevino and Dr. Leslie Randall. Thank you so much. And Dr. Vanessa Sheppard for this wealth of information today to break it all the way down. And this is why we have HERSTORY RVA with International Clinical Trials Day and debunking all of the myths and what you need to know. And before we go, if folks would like to learn more about clinical trials, where should they go, Dr. Randall?
A Massey website, and you can search Massey Cancer Center clinical trials, and you can search by your tumor type. You can search for different doctors within the Massey Cancer Center. And there are phone numbers and email addresses there that you can contact us. And I get contacted all the time from that email box, and we love to reach out. We love to hear from the community. We're kind of stuck in our offices, working nose to the grindstone all the time. We love for you to reach out. It's terrific.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. HERSTORY RVA, sponsored by VCU Health. This has been a great show. Your health is everything. Let's go all the way up. Peace.
It's critically important for improving the outcomes for patients with cancer. Any new treatment that we come up with can't really be instituted and improve the lives of cancer patients until we've been able to demonstrate its activity in a small group of patients first, but then moving on to large groups of patients to compare a new treatment to the standard of care treatments to see if it really is better. Another good reason is that care for patients on a clinical trial is the best care available because of how carefully they're followed, how carefully they're looked after, and how carefully the data are collected about their outcomes. And particularly in this region, we have the opportunity, because of our large minority population, to do something that hasn't been done much before, and that's to make the outcomes or the results of clinical research trials applicable to the whole U.S. and world population. Because up until now, clinical trials have mostly been carried out on white people, and that's not what the rest of the world or even the rest of our country looks like.